That's right. It's the right question to be asking at this point in time. And I would put a lot of the explanatory power here behind local actors on each side of the conflict. A number of war veterans in Ukraine who yield a large amount of political power here are increasingly frustrated with the slow pace of the conflict. And on the separatist side as well, in the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, these upticks in fighting happen from time to time, sometimes as a way of almost lobbying for additional support from Russia. I think on each side of the aisle, not only are they looking at their own local politics and trying to win support for a more aggressive stance for their own sides here, but they're also looking to see how the outside powers that are looking at this conflict will react in this case. In the case of Russia, I think it's important to keep in mind here that Russia is still hoping to engage with the United States and the Donald Trump administration in hopes of reaching some sort of détente and perhaps a deal that could eventually see some easing of sanctions.
What are your insights into why Russia has recently moved really on a number of big fronts of the eastern Ukraine, recognizing passports here, kind of extending a de facto citizenship to the region, introducing the ruble as a currency, confiscating a series of Ukrainian companies, businesses that were based in that region? Why this now?
So I think the territories here are increasingly in need of greater financial and economic support from Russia, while the rest of Ukraine is seeing gradual recovery and, of course, relies to a greater extent than often realized on the steel industry and other areas of production that are still connected to parts of the Donbas Valley here. These territories are extraordinarily dependent on Russia here. I think Russia is offering them a sort of concession while also holding out a threat for the future, where if things stay this way forever, they will not always, if the situation requires it, stay committed to the stalled Minsk peace process, which is the case for now, and which I think probably would still be the case for the future. But the threat is there, and I think that's an important signal.
Do you think we fully appreciate in the West the extent to which, well, Russia's got a lot to lose here? There's a lot of, in a sense, face at play in terms of domestic Russian politics vis-a-vis how this conflict plays out and what happens to these so-called rebels in the eastern Ukraine.
Well, I think that is quite true. And yet, time probably is on Moscow's side here. I mean, to a large extent, they have achieved many of the basic gains that they would have wanted from the war in Ukraine as it has played out. It is what is often called the misnomer of a frozen conflict, keeping in mind that shelling continues on a regular basis. Uptick or not, people die in this place on a monthly basis or more frequently here. And yet, so long as this conflict is in place, it undermines the prospect for Ukraine to move towards NATO membership. It puts a question over their political and economic future, and it has posed really an extraordinary test of the United States and European commitment towards Ukraine, one that is going to be constantly reevaluated, particularly with the Trump administration in office now.
What kind of financial pressure, though, do you think this conflict is creating for Russia? I mean, the cost supposedly of maintaining Crimea now as a de facto Russian protectorate, hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Obviously here, effects to Russian industry, business, trade with the Ukraine, potential military costs. Can Russia keep this up indefinitely?
Indefinitely is still a question of time here. As far as I'm concerned, for the next several years, I am not worried about the state of the Russian economy. It is returning to growth moderately, slowly, but it is there, in large part because of rising oil prices. Its fiscal and financial situation is fairly stable. Fiscal planners have maintained a fairly tight budget, and while they have drawn down on some of their fiscal reserves, particularly in the reserve fund, which I believe is down to somewhere around $10–15 billion at this point, they can keep their economy running for some time now. I think the bigger question in the future is whether they will be able to implement the structural reforms that are needed to see more than 1% to 2% growth on average for the next 5 years or longer here. So I wouldn't be looking to the state of Russia's finances or the economy for clues in how much it's willing to support the breakaway republics in Ukraine. For Russia, and particularly for the Kremlin here, this has been a geopolitical consideration that has trumped any economics that have come alongside there.
Quite literally. Let's finally end on the government in Kiev. What is its condition? I mean, there's a sense here that, yes, an economic recovery is underway in western Ukraine, but really people still saying corruption is endemic, and it's displayed kind of pervasive incompetence in terms of how it's fought this war, it's fought this conflict.
There's a lot of frustration in Ukraine. I can think of very few political leaders right now who have approval ratings even in the double digits, if they're able to achieve that much here. Most of this concern really is directed towards slow progress on combating corruption, slow progress in bringing out the level of reforms and the transformation of the political culture in Ukraine towards one that is much more progressive and oriented towards clean government and effective government here. There is frustration in the conflict as well, as I mentioned before. This has gone on for several years now, since mid-2014. And despite the amount of time and the amount of lives that have been lost and continue to be lost, it is stuck in place right now. And a lot of Ukrainians, I think, are frustrated with that. They'd like to see more pressure, often on pressure exerted from outside on Russia to implement its end of the Minsk peace process here. But I think there is some frustration as well with the way in which the government has been handling it going forward.